I'm going to try to reconstruct what it was back in the 50s. I know that many of you won't believe this. Many of you will think it's a fantasy. I suppose if I went to a psychiatrist, they'd think had a fantasy myself. Remember, the 50s existed without the advent of drugs or hallucinogenics and other aids to bend the mind or alter reality. So the only thing I've got is my memory, and at this age is probably a little bit cloudy, foggy, and revisionist. But I'm going to give it a try. I grew up in the country. A lot of my friends and classmates grew up in the country too. The United States was just recovering, or had recovered, from World War II. We industrialized and went mainly from an agricultural to a rural or to an urban society. The economy was pretty strong, the future looked bright, and the people in this country wanted to assure the future and make sure that we didn't have to protect it with another war. Excuse me. And in order to make sure that didn't happen, we developed a certain degree of paranoia. Also, exploding nuclear weapons over Japan caused a great deal of paranoia. And the fact that we developed that bomb and it was so powerful caused the paranoia to spread to the point where we were paranoid that other nations or other peoples might get the weapon. So we instituted a semi-police state to make sure that didn't happen, and a military state to make sure that if it did happen, we could knock the shit out of anybody that tried to mess with us. And then in order to secure that, we changed our educational system and invented a Cold War and improved our transportation systems, housing systems, and educational systems. We were going to be the best and the greatest. President Eisenhower shepherded us along those lines. We set up the interstate highway system. There's great educational change, upgrading our educational system, promoting education, giving out scholarships. We had the National Defense Act, for instance, which essentially paid my way through school. If you had a certain grade point average in certain areas, you didn't pay tuition. I never paid tuition. Most of my friends in high school didn't pay tuition. In fact, many of us were paid to go to school, which isn't the case now. We were very afraid that some other nation, particularly the Soviet Union or Russia, would get ahead of us, that we invested in brain power, we invested in our children, we invested in our future in order that that didn't happen. We wanted to make sure that we created and maintained leadership throughout the world. And that was accomplished through things like the Peace Corps or the National Science Foundation, Defense Education Act, things such as this. Well, that carried on under Kennedy. And we had great expanse, we had a great deal of patriotism, we had a great deal of pride, and we were going to beat the shit out of the Russians no matter what. We had one problem though, and that was with Cuba. They were threatening us, and they allowed the Soviet Union to put missiles on their island just to screw with us, which annoyed us quite a bit. and caused reactions. But by and large, Kennedy continued with improving the country, improving the education system, and imbuing a bunch of idealism into the youth population of this country. Well, unfortunately, after he got whacked, there was all kinds of different changes. The country became more right-wing, became more paranoid. The Birch Society popped its head up and tried to convince us the Russians were coming and that fluoridation was going to sap our vital bodily fluids. And we needed to do more to keep up with the Russians. And there's even talk of first strike. That was scary as hell, from which the movie Dr. Strangelove came. It was kind of like preventive detention. You hit them first before they hit you, and if you hit them soon enough, hard enough, they won't be able to hit you back, and therefore you win. A lot of discussion about that, which scared the hell out of a lot of us. In any event, a lot of that idealism got killed along with John Kennedy, but not all of it. And his successor, Lyndon Johnson, tried to continue the legacy with his Great Society. Now, I was getting out of law school then and was a great believer in the Great Society, and it was probably my most successful time. I got recruited to be general counsel for this Head Start program through Health, Education, and Welfare. I was one of the founders of a movement called the Community Free School in Boulder Community Free School. There were 3 of us that started it, and it's still going today. We formulated a clinic, a Hispanic clinic, under the Head Start program, even though Nixon tried to kill it. And I had press conferences and all kinds of fun things that I got to do with that program. Additionally, I got appointed as the first municipal judge to a municipality called Lyons, Colorado, which gave me a bit of an income. And Senator Dominic got me on a committee for drug abuse control, where we were to come up with accreditation standards for drug abuse programs. They were funded by Health, Education, and Welfare back then also. So we met quite often. We had a good staff. We had directors. We had a program director. We had an executive director and several board members. And we sat around discussing the problems of drug abuse, addiction, and how they should be treated. The model was that of a health model, a community health model, a medical model, you might say. Well, that started changing after Johnson announced he wasn't going to run again. Now, back then were fun days for me. I was a participant in various anti-war activity that I started in Chicago and continued when I moved back to Colorado. I was active in the civil rights movement. I was active in Students for Democratic Society. All kinds of fun things to do other than practice law, I guess. But I really enjoyed it. Well, all of a sudden, the convention of 1968 occurred. And I was right back to where I started when I sort of was asked to leave graduate school for political activity. We had a new regime come in. It was Richard Nixon. And I tried to save what I could of the Head Start program. I filed for emergency budgets because I knew that he was going to reduce them. But the worst thing that happened was our little organization on accreditation standards for drug abuse control got scuttled. And Nixon impounded our funds and formed a new agency called Law Enforcement Assistance Agency, and with the stroke of a pen turned a medical problem into a law enforcement problem. And the whole area of drug abuse, and to that extent mental health, was criminalized. And we're still paying the consequences of that right now today, with various penalties for drug laws, drug abuse, drug enforcement, etc. The budget has gone astronomical, and it's turned into essentially a device whereby certain segments of the population with certain beliefs, organizational structures, and that can be controlled, ostracized, and eventually abolished. It was a psychological warfare operation against a lot of the citizenry, the young citizenry of the United States, which we're all paying for now in our old age. So, many of us were quite worried. Before I went to law school, I did a study in political sociology using random and biased net theory, analyzing a fluoridation referendum in Boulder. And one of the things the researchers assumed was because Boulder had a strong founding of Seventh-day Adventists, which were against chemicals and things such as this, that the fluoridation referendum was spearheaded by the Seventh-day Adventists. What we found was that they stayed neutral. And the main opponent and the people working behind the fluoridation issue were members of a group called the John Birch Society, which from that point on I've been studying, and that's been since 1963, I guess. So I've studied right-wing movements now for quite some time, political movements in general, actually, both left and right. Anyway, the fluoridation referendum, I got to put together a lot of data. I learned techniques of analysis. I learned net theory, and learned that there was a whole power structure in this country that wasn't well known and wasn't well researched and was very powerful. And studying the composition and the funding of the Birch Society was similar to the way the funding occurred for the Nazi Party under Hitler. They had a bunch of big donors, most of them are industrialists, the Welches that had the grape jam, the Schicks that made razors, razor blades, the Murchisons, big oil people, Hunts, put a lot of money into fighting liberal or enlightened politics in this country, and it manifested itself in things like the fluoridation referendum, which were talking points that they could rally around and organize various structures and political vehicles to accomplish their ends. This has still not been researched very much, but I think it's very important to know about. And it's still going on today through the Cook brothers and people like this. Anyway, we went from the Great Society to something else. I haven't quite figured out a good logical descriptive name for it, but it sure as hell isn't the Good Society. And institutions changed along with that. And one of the institutions that I'm really familiar with is the legal institution. In order to engender commerce, profits, etc., we had to change the legal system. And contrary to the founding fathers, which stated the common law of England was going to be the law of the United States, or at least of the colonies at that time, later the United States, was changed. And the common law of England is no longer the law of this country. It's Napoleonic Code or Roman law. And there are certain things about that that aren't incompatible with the common law of and a lot of Judeo-Christian viewpoints that are contrary, which I hope to explore the next several sessions here. In the meantime, I would like to thank you for watching and thank you for your patience, and hope I'm entertaining. I'll try to keep them as short as I can. I'll try to remember not to ramble. I would like your suggestions and feedback if possible. And I'll sign off now. You guys have a good weekend. Bye.